All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shamas. I'm a sales tech here at Nagios Enterprises. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on network monitoring with Nagios. This will be a higher level introduction to network monitoring with Nagios because network monitoring is a somewhat complicated subject. This webinar is unique where instead of covering just a single solution, we'll actually cover several as they relate specifically to network monitoring. The presentation should last about 45 minutes, and then after the presentation's finished, we'll leave plenty of time for a quick Q&A session. During the presentation, audio feeds from you guys will be muted, but that definitely doesn't mean I don't want to hear from you. If you have any questions at all, go ahead and type those into the questions or the chat section of the GoToWebinar interface. And then after the session, we'll leave plenty of time, like I said, to cover those for you. So I definitely want to hear from you. I'm more than happy to answer questions. And so if you could go ahead and type those in, I'll be sure to cover them. If you have other questions beyond what we can cover here today, you can always email us at sales@nagios.com, and we'll do everything we can to answer those for you. And also, if you'd like a custom demo on the tools we look at today or other Nagios solutions, again, you can email us at sales@nagios.com, and we can set up a custom demo for you and your team. And finally, we will be recording today's presentation, so it can be made available to others online in the future. So with that being said, let's jump over to our agenda slide and talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. First off, we'll talk about Nagios XI, which is going to actually monitor a lot of the things in your network. With XI, you can monitor things like ping checks to make sure that all of your network devices are available. You can monitor interface bandwidth in and out on the ports on your switches and routers. And so XI will cover that side of things, and typically in an environment, XI would monitor about 90% of the things that you'd like to check. There's two notable exceptions to what XI can monitor, and that would be log data and flow data. And that's where Log Server and Network Analyzer come in. So we'll talk about those two solutions as well. With Nagios Log Server, you're able to collect, archive, query, dashboard, and alert on pretty much any kind of machine-generated log data. And in this case, we'd be talking about typically syslog data from network devices. And with Network Analyzer, you're able to collect and query and report and alert on flow data from flow-enabled network devices and from servers potentially that would be running a client that enables them to produce flow data. So each tool individually can have a lot of value in the context of network monitoring, but all of the tools together give you a really nice holistic overview of the performance of your entire network. So again, each one's got a lot of value by itself, but put them all together and there's really not going to be a lot happening on your network that you're not aware of. And so put them together, that gives you total network monitoring, and we will actually talk about not only what each one can do individually, but how all the tools can work together as well. And so ultimately Nagios XI would kind of become your centralized point of visibility and reporting and alerting for the things that are being checked across all of the solutions. And so to start off with, we'll look at Nagios XI, and we'll start by talking a little bit about XI from an architectural perspective. And so in XI, typically you'd be doing what's called an active check of your network devices. And an active check means that the Nagios server is going to reach out to your network devices and check certain data on them. And in the context of network monitoring, it would probably be doing the ping check that we talked about. So an ICMP ping check to make sure that the device is available, to make sure there's not significant packet loss, and also checking port status and interface bandwidth in and out on those ports. And this would be done using the network switch and router wizard that I'll demo for you, and that uses SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol, which is a native protocol on most network devices. And so it uses SNMP, it checks that data, it gets results back, and then it would alert based on that data and also provide you with various reports and visualizations on that network data. Now, just so you know that it's an option, there's an alternative method, which would be SNMP traps, and that's what would be considered a passive method. And with a passive method like SNMP traps, with network devices, you're still using a native protocol, but instead of your Nagios XI server reaching out to the network device to see what's going on, the network device itself would bubble data up northbound to the XI server when specific things happen. And so basically a certain scenario would be detected by the device, and it would kick an SNMP trap up to XI, and then XI would do the alerting, would collect that data, and provide visualizations and reports based on it. As I said, typically XI is going to be doing the active checks using the wizard we'll look at today. But one nice thing about passive checks, about something like SNMP traps, is that it's almost instantaneous. So as soon as that particular thing happens on the network device, it's going to send that trap to XI, and XI is going to know about it. So that's an advantage. But again, typically active checks are how we'd approach network monitoring using SNMP to get the bandwidth and things like that. So there's a few different ways to approach it. And just as a quick note, one more advantage to a passive model would be that you don't need inbound permissions to that particular device. All the communication is outbound. So even if you are potentially from a network security perspective going to have trouble getting inbound, you can just send the data outbound back to your Nagios XI server. So just so you know that that's a possibility, let me go ahead and clear my drawings here and get back to my regular cursor. And then again, once you have collected that data, XI is going to provide you with ways to report on, to visualize, and with built-in email and text alerting based on the things that are discovered. So let's jump over to the XI interface and just jump right in and take a quick look at Nagios XI and demo some of the network monitoring capabilities that it's got. And so when you first log into the XI interface, you're presented with a quick pop-up that's going to tell you about unhandled problems, an unhandled problem being an issue that an administrator hasn't yet acknowledged. So a human hasn't yet jumped in the system and said, hey, I'm aware of the issue, we got the alert, we're working on it. And until somebody does, it's shown as an unhandled or an open problem. And so behind that, we've got a custom dashboard, and each user can have their own custom dashboard. And I will mention that we do have individual webinars for each tool too. So today we're going to move pretty quick. We're going to bounce between solutions. We're going to give you a higher level overview, and we're really going to focus on network monitoring. But keep an eye out on the webinars page, because there are individual sessions for each tool as well that dig in a little deeper. So as I said, behind that pop-up, you've got a quick look at your own custom home dashboard, and each user can customize this to basically show whatever data they want, choosing from the many dashlets that are built in. Now, to configure monitoring of a network device, we'll start there. We'll go to Configure. We'll jump over to our configuration wizards, and we'll just do a quick filter for network. And here we see the network switch and router wizard, which makes it exceedingly simple to configure monitoring of a network device. And so first, we'll punch in our IP address, and it does support SNMP v1, 2C, and 3. We'll also put in our community string to enable Nagios XI to communicate with and authenticate through to pull specific metrics from this device. And then we can monitor using port number, which is the default, or use something like port name or description if you've defined these over on the network device side. And so we'll use port number, and we'll leave this checked here, which means Nagios XI is actually going to do a quick scan of this particular device to auto-detect interfaces that can be monitored, as it says here. So once we've got all our data in, we'll just hit next. And so Nagios XI right now is reaching out to this network device. This is an HP ProCurve switch that we'll actually be focusing on across the solutions for the presentation. And it's going to return to us a list of all the interfaces that can be monitored. And I'll also mention, since it's kind of in scope, that this exact same wizard can be run on a server as well. As long as SNMP is enabled on the server, you can run this wizard to monitor interface bandwidth on the servers themselves, as well as your switches and routers. And another thing I'll mention along that note is that the wizards are additive. So say, for example, you ran a Windows Server monitoring wizard. You could then run this network switch and router wizard using the exact same host name, and Nagios XI will just add those interface bandwidth checks right alongside everything else you're checking on that device. So that's a really cool feature as well. But with this HP ProCurve, we're presented with a nice list of all the ports that are available. If you did choose to actually label them by name or description, that's actually going to show up here in the service description area. If you choose number, it'll basically just show you what we see here, port 1, port 2, port 3. You do have the ability to customize these as well, though. And then for each port, you're determining, do you want to do a port status check? Do you want to monitor bandwidth in and out? What thresholds do you want to define? You can keep the defaults, or you can choose your own. And then once you made those choices, just jump to the next step, choose how often you'd like to monitor the host, and then choose how often you'd like to recheck items if they go into a problem state. And in the context of network monitoring, this is an important decision, because the default behavior is that, say, interface bandwidth is found to be exceeding a threshold. One option would be for Nagios XI to immediately send you an alert as soon as it runs a check and determines the bandwidth has exceeded that threshold. But it could be that maybe you're not too concerned about a momentary spike, you're more concerned about persistent overutilization of that particular port. So What the retry interval choice here does is, by default, XI is going to recheck that particular item 5 times once a minute, so rapidly recheck it once a minute 5 times, to make sure that that problem persists before sending an alert. So in some cases, you may well want to know immediately if bandwidth utilization spikes on an interface. In other cases, you might be more concerned about that persisting over time. So if you leave it as it is, Nagios XI will basically check it rapidly a few times, make sure it persists, then send an alert. But if it is a scenario where you want to get an alert right away, just change the second number to a 1, and then XI will alert you immediately if any of your thresholds are exceeded on a particular port. And then in the next step, we're just determining who to send notifications to. You can always also have Nagios XI remind you periodically if a problem persists over a period of time. And then in the final step, the host groups and service groups, first off, that you'd like to add this host and its services, the host being the device, the services being metrics like port status and interface bandwidth, groups of those that you'd like to add them to. And you can see here we've actually got ours organized by the type of device. So this would logically go in the switches host group, but you can organize these by location, by device type as we have, by department, really however you want to set it up so that later on in things like reports and tactical displays, you can easily filter for subsets of your infrastructure. And then service groups are the same concept, just for the services, for the specific metrics being monitored on those hosts. Now, parent-child relationships are also quite important in the context of network monitoring. This is going to tell Nagios how things interrelate from Nagios's perspective on the topology front. And so making sure that you accurately define your parent-child relationships will ensure not only that Nagios is presenting you with accurate topology diagrams, which I'll show you one in a second, but also that Nagios will alert you intelligently based on its ability to actually get through to certain devices. So if we bounce back to our home menu and go down here to the hypermap, we'll actually see the topology as Nagios understands it for this particular system. So here's our Nagios process, here's the office backbone, here's the firewall, here's some websites and external resources being monitored. Now if you set these properly, say the firewall went into a critical state, Nagios is going to realize, you know, I actually can't route through that to check these other items, so I'm going to tag them as unreachable for the time being. And then you can determine whether or not you get an unreachable alert. In a lot of cases, people negate unreachable alerts. That way you don't get a flood of alerts for things Nagios can't actually check, and you're able to just kind of weed out all that noise and just focus on the root cause, which in this case would be a firewall outage. So that's important. Make sure you define those relationships correctly. Now, once you've configured monitoring of a network device, and that wizard we just ran is pretty much vendor agnostic. It should work on just about any kind of switch or router that supports SNMP. Once you've configured the monitoring, then XI gives you a lot of ways to interact with the data beyond just getting the email and text alerts. So one thing we could take a look at would be the bandwidth usage report here in the reports menu. So we'll click over to that and take a quick look. And this is a really cool report. Basically, it enables you to pick a port that you want to focus on and then see daily, weekly, monthly, and annual traffic for that particular interface. And each of these panels can be exported as a PNG, a JPEG, a PDF, a vector image, so lots of ways to get these out of the system. You'll see traffic in blue, traffic out in green, and so again, you've got daily, weekly, monthly, and annual traffic. And underneath this, you've got actual monthly breakdowns, numerical totals, of in-out, max, and sum for this particular interface. And I'll also note that you can click through on a month to see daily totals. And then in XI, the reports can be downloaded as different file types, CSV, PDF, JPEG. They can be emailed from the system, and in the Enterprise Edition, they can actually be scheduled for automatic delivery on a schedule. So that's a really nice feature as well. So bandwidth usage is really useful. Another very useful report would be capacity planning, and this is actually another one of the enterprise features of Nagios XI. And this particular report is going to enable you to actually project future usage based on the historical data the system has collected. So say we wanted to look 6 months into the future, and we'll go to that HP Pro curve that we configured monitoring of, and we'll choose port 1 bandwidth, and we'll click run, and XI is actually going to project what will probably happen. So in blue, this is the actual real historical data the system has collected based on checks that were run. And you can hover over a data point to see the numerical data. And then in gray here, this is what's likely to happen in the next 6 months based on that collected historical data. So you can see utilization is slowly ramping up, but you can also overlay your warning and critical thresholds to get a little context. And based on this, not only are we occasionally exceeding our warning threshold, but there's a good chance that'll happen again in the future, although unless something changes significantly, you're probably not going to hit your critical threshold at any point. And obviously things could change, but this is a really nice way to get an idea of where you might want to allocate additional resources to get ahead of that need in the future. And then each of these can be added to a dashboard, so keep an eye out for this upward pointing blue arrow in the XI interface. That means you can take this item and put it on a dashboard, so you can kind of have a look into the future dashboard for quick reference at any time. And same concept with bandwidth out. You've got what happened in the past, what will probably happen in the future. You can overlay your thresholds. And you can also look at numerical data. You can see a summary and numerical data for all those data points that are taken into consideration to determine that projection. So that's a really nice report. And then finally, the SLA report could really come in handy as well. We could look at, we'll focus in on that particular host again, that HP Pro curve. We'll look at all services. We'll define 5 nines carrier grade SLA. And in this case, we'll probably want to hide downtime. So maintenance windows that you've already scheduled in advance, warning states and unknown unreachable, to really just focus on those known critical failures. And we'll run our report. The host looks great, 100% uptime, that's awesome. But we see that we actually did fall below that SLA on a few of the ports. And then we can take a look at the very bottom of this to see the average. And so this report, just like the bandwidth report, can be exported, it can be emailed, it can be scheduled, and that makes it really easy to report on whether or not you met your SLAs. And hopefully by using the tools that we've got, you'll be able to easily meet those SLAs and make sure that things are working as often as you need them to, ideally all the time. Another cool thing about XI is that if we go back to the home menu, you've got tools like the Graph Explorer. And so you saw the bandwidth usage report, which graphs per port bandwidth, the daily, weekly, monthly, and annual. But in Graph Explorer, you've also got things like time stacking and multi-stacking. And so going back to dot 41 and taking a look at that port 1 bandwidth, you're able to compare 3 days, 3 weeks, or 3 months and see how it performed versus itself over a time period. So here in a 3-day view, in orange we're seeing 3 days ago, in green we're seeing 2 days ago, and in blue we're seeing the last 24 hours. And one nice thing about this is that it makes it really easy to identify spikes. For instance here, we got a big spike in utilization 3 days ago during a time that we're normally kind of flatlined. And then we can reset our zoom here. Or here where we're always seeing a lot of traffic during a time period. And of course, this looks like business hours. And so that makes sense. But you can look for spikes, you can look for unique things that are happening that normally wouldn't, or you can look for times like this where you're always getting a lot of traffic and kind of figure out what's going on with that. So Graph Explorer is a really useful tool in the context of network monitoring as well. And then real quick too, I'll also showcase Nagios. Give me just a second to authenticate here. And this is a really cool, long-running, open-source Nagios-related project from a third party. And with Nagios, you're able to create your own Visio-style diagrams. So for today, Office Network would be really useful. Here you can actually create your own diagrams, custom diagrams showing any information you're interested in. And then with Nagios, which is a really cool project, you can actually overlay active icons, indicating the status of particular objects, indicating whether you've got a route through to certain things. You can also do more of a geographic perspective with active icons. Or another example would be pictures of physical infrastructure that's supporting your network with active icons indicating the statuses on that. So that's really useful as well, super customizable, a little bit of a learning curve, but once you get the swing of it, Nagios gives you a lot of power to create pretty much any kind of diagram with active icons on it that you'd like to. And so that's a quick look at the XI side of things. Next we'll move over to Network Analyzer and talk a little bit about that. So in Nagios XI, as you saw, it's very simple to set up monitoring of bandwidth on your network devices and to detect when bandwidth exceeds a certain threshold that you put in place, letting you know that there's just too much traffic on a particular port. Now that's great to know, it's a very important metric, but the next question would be why? Why do I have so much traffic on this particular interface? And that's where Network Analyzer comes into play. It helps you be a network detective. So flow data, in case you're not familiar with it, provides you with the who, the what, the when, the where, as we see here. So it provides you with things like IP origin and destination data, origin and destination port data. So you can not only see you've got a lot of traffic, but now with Network Analyzer, also see where it's coming from, where it's going to, and also what ports are being traversed to help you understand what kind of traffic this is. For example, if you see a bunch of communication with port 80 or 443, you know you're looking at web traffic. Now, with Network Analyzer, one thing I'll mention is that you would need a Flow-enabled network device. So not all network devices support Flow, but a lot of modern ones do. So assuming it's Flow-enabled and can produce NetFlow, SFlow, JFlow, IPFix, most Flow protocols, then Network Analyzer can collect that data. Now, you can also use clients on servers to collect Flow data from them as well. So you could monitor not only bandwidth, but also collect Flow data. On Linux systems, there's a free fprobe client that can be used. On Windows systems, there's a paid client called nprobe and probably some other ones that could be used. But once you install that client, then that particular device generates Flow data as well. And for Network Analyzer, we talked about active and passive checks with Nagios XI. And again, an active check is where XI reaches out to the device to check particular metrics, as the wizard does that we went through. With Network Analyzer, it's strictly a feed from the devices northbound up to Network Analyzer. So it strictly acts as a collector for data that's being generated on and then bubbled up to your Network Analyzer server. And another thing I'll mention here is that Nagios XI, Network Analyzer, and Log Server would all be running on their own servers. So they wouldn't all be installed on the same server. One of the primary drivers for Network Analyzer and Log Server being separate solutions is that flow collection and log collection are very resource intensive. Flow data and logs can take up a lot of space. They can be resource intensive to collect, to parse, to query, to report on. And so we broke those off into separate solutions to keep that load off of your XI server and then push it onto a different server. So the sources would send their data northbound up to Network Analyzer, and the Network Analyzer collects the data. It provides you with reports and querying capabilities and alerting capabilities, and there's a lot of different ways that Network Analyzer can alert. Network Analyzer also can integrate reports with XI, so we will bounce back to the XI server and take a look at those reports within XI as well. So next, let's jump into the Network Analyzer demo box here and take a quick look. So when we first log in, here's your home dashboard. You've got information about just raw traffic over the last 30 minutes and 5-minute blocks for each of your sources. And again, I'll reiterate that we do have a full session for each tool, and we dig into sources a little more in the full Network Analyzer session. But for this particular presentation, suffice to say that a source in Network Analyzer is really just a specific port the Network Analyzer expects flow data to be received on. And you can set this up however you want. You can have multiple devices feed into Network Analyzer as a single source, or for greater granularity, you can configure each network device to be an individual source, so you can really break it down and query and report on each one individually. So that's a common approach there. And then here, you can also see the status of your sources. So for example, this Linux source currently isn't providing us with any data. Underneath that, you can see all of your alerts, so query-based alerts looking for a certain amount of traffic that meets certain kind of criteria, and you can filter these by the type. Here we've got a simple check looking for a certain amount of traffic on port 80, a certain amount of web traffic that has exceeded our threshold, our bytes threshold. And then underneath that, you got the abnormal behavior table. And this is really cool. This actually works like Nagios XI's capacity planning. Only in this case, what it does is it looks at past behavior, projects what should happen in the future, and then provides you with a red indicator here. And we don't actually have any at this particular moment, but you'd see a red rectangle here indicating that whatever's happening right now is deviating from what Network Analyzer anticipated would happen in this particular time frame. And if you click on these blocks, you can actually have quick access to specific reports just to help you kind of figure out right away what's going on that particular source. So that's a really cool tool. And that's built right in as well. That's automatic. As soon as you start to collect flow data, Network Analyzer starts to do projections. Now, once that data is collected, beyond just the quick heads up you've got here in the home menu, you've also got reports and queries. And so we'll actually click through to a particular source. We'll go to our sources list. We'll click through on source 1 here. And you can see bandwidth. You can see flows, you can see bytes, you can see packet counts. That's another cool thing about Network Analyzer. It actually provides you with packet counts rather than just raw bandwidth. You can also see bytes a second and graph that here on the summary tab. Underneath that, you've got top 5 talkers by destination IP, source IP, destination port, source port, and From here, you'll notice these are actually hyperlinks. If you want to just drill down very quickly to a query based on any of these top talkers, you certainly can. So using web traffic as an example, again, we see that's #1 with a bullet for top 5 talkers. We could simply click on that, and that'll bounce you over to the Queries tab and automatically create a simple query for you, drilling down to that particular data. So here, the query is just DST port, destination port 80, and the queries are fairly simple to create. DST port, source port, SRC IP, which would be the source IP, DST IP, which would be the destination IP, and then just standard operators like and, or, not, grouping things in parentheses. And so by clicking that, it just created a query for us, destination port 80, over the last 24 hours. And scrolling down, we can see the source port, we can see the destination port, and what you will notice is that right now, source IP and destination IP aren't actually shown. And that would be a result of our aggregate by choice up here. And so what we could do is append this, and at SRC IP, one thing I'll mention is kind of a gotcha, is that if you put a space between these and try to run your query, it's going to bomb out. So you'd want to remove that space. That's a common mistake. The aggregate by is fine, you just got that extra white space there, and then run your query, and then it's going to generate it for us again and provide information on the actual source IP. And again, you could also add destination IP here to see more information. You can also load additional queries. You can save these, you can load them. For example, here's one looking for common botnets. We'll load that quick. This is a little bit more complex query where we're looking for beacons out to particular IPs on particular ports, or other IPs on particular ports, etc. And this is good, we see no data, but if you did see data here, then you'd know that you were beaconing out to known botnets, and that's something you definitely want to do something about right away. So once you put your query together, determine your aggregate by, your time frame, then you can save it. And then, like I said, from then on, you can very easily see what's going on in the future just by running a very quick query. Now you've also got the reports, and so these would be, for instance, like we see here, top 5 talkers by source IP. There are built-in reports. Everything with an asterisk here is going to be a report that's available right out of the box, and then you can create your own very easily. You can export the reports as a PDF, and so they can actually be exported from the system. So you can just pick the report that you'd like to look at, for instance, top 5 talkers by destination port, run the report, and then scroll down, and you'll see how long it lasted, when it started, what port was involved, how many flows were involved, how many packets, how many bytes, how many bits a second, bits a packet, packets a second. So it gives you some really useful information on the traffic on your network, well beyond just bandwidth. Now, I also mentioned that these reports are available in XI, and so we'll bounce back to the XI interface. We'll go to our reports, and right here in Network Report, we can see all of those reports. And I'll note that in a big environment where you might run multiple network analyzer servers, you can integrate them all with a single XI. So that's really nice. You can pick from any of your reports here, visualize things like chord diagrams, just like a network analyzer. You can very easily see what's talking to what visually, and also look at all of your network queries. Now another integration point, and this is true for Network Analyzer and for Nagios Log Server, is alerting. And so we'll jump over to alerts here. We'll go to create a new check, and we'll call this our network monitoring check. Now with the alerts, first you pick a source, and you can either pick an individual source or possibly a logical group of sources that you've put together, for instance, all sources. In this case, we'll just use one source. We'll use source 1, and then views, which we dig into more in the full webinar, are basically a way to filter down things like alerts for specific subsets of the data. For instance, I could filter down to .41, the HP Pro Curve we've been looking at, and it gives you the ability to retain raw data longer for a particular item that matches this filter, in this case .41. So that's another quick thing I'll mention, is that in Network Analyzer, typically you'd only be retaining the raw data for 1 to 3 days. So it's more of a short-term, what's happening now or very recently tool. But with views, you can also choose to retain some data longer to help you prioritize. But we do source 1, we'll do .41, we'll flip over to step 2, we'll analyze for bytes. And we'll just throw in some numbers here. So just the number of bytes. You can also do flows, packets, bytes a second. And then once you've put in your warning and critical threshold, which is simply the numerical total that must be exceeded in order for an alert to be generated, you then choose the rest of your parameters. So this amount of traffic, where the destination, source, destination, or source, port, IP, or network is or is not something in particular. So we'll do web traffic for this one too. That's the example we've used so far. You can also string these together, so you can create blocks of logic and then string those together into a more complex chain that will be alerted on. So once you get all this figured out, you move to step 3, and here's where you can again have another integration point with Nagios XI. So if you can email people directly from Network Analyzer, so XI, Log Server, and Network Analyzer can all independently do their job, provide their value, and send out alerts to administrators. You can send out an SNMP trap. You can execute a script, just like the event handlers the Nagios XI can run, automated scripted actions that would take place in response to a problem detection. Or you can send out an SNMP trap. So that would be a common way to integrate with a SIM or a ticketing solution as an example. But with the Nagios option, you'd basically send these alerts up to Nagios XI, where you'd have centralized visibility, reporting, and alerting on everything XI is doing and everything Network Analyzer is doing. So that's a really nice integration point. So that's a quick walkthrough of Network Analyzer, and next we will look at Log Server. So again, XI would be ping checks, bandwidth checks. Network Analyzer would collect that flow data to help you be a network detective to see what's actually happening to create all of that traffic. And then Log Server is the final piece of the puzzle. So Log Server is going to collect all of the syslog data from those network devices and give you a bunch of other useful metrics. And just like Network Analyzer, in Nagios Log Server, your sources would be sending their data northbound up to the Log Server cluster. So it's strictly a passive send from the sources up to Log Server. Log Server is built on the ELK stack, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, which some of you might be familiar with, and is a clustered solution, so you could run a single instance. Otherwise, you've got the ability to cluster multiple instances together, so you've got cluster redundancy, you've got load balancing for faster searches. And then once Log Server collects all of that data, then it's providing you with a variety of different visualizations. You've got dashboards, you can query for specific subsets of the data, and just like XI and Network Analyzer, a lot of different alerting capabilities. So now let's jump into the Log Server interface and take a quick look around. So when you first get to the interface, you'll see some useful information in the home dashboard. You've got information about the unique hosts that are sending data in, and this report is actually new in Log Server 2. So here you can see all the IP addresses, all the sources that are sending in data. You can also see sources that used to be sending in data that aren't anymore. So that's kind of nice. You can remove these if you'd like. Otherwise, that's a heads up to you that something that used to be sending data in is no longer. And then you've also got quick access to your dashboards, your personal dashboards and queries, your global dashboards and queries, which everyone can see. Information to let you know that you're running the latest version, and then quick setup guides for common types of sources. Now for this session we're talking about network devices, so we'll take a look at that one, but I will note that if you click plus add log source at the top here, the big green button, you'll have access to a bunch of new setup guides, and you do have, in addition to network devices, you've got Linux systems, Windows, applications like Apache, IIS, MySQL, MS SQL, PHP, specific Linux files or Windows files that you'd like to forward logs from, and then a way to also import logs as a one-time import from a file that you might have. So you might have a file full of log data that you'd like to shuffle into Log Server, so you can take advantage of it, analyze it, and query it inside a Log Server. Now for a network device, it's really just a matter of configuring the device to send its logs to Log Server. Now in our case, we're going to be sending it to a host name. By default in Log Server, you'd be sending the logs to a specific IP, so a specific instance IP. But you can also set up a load balancer or a round-robin DNS setup, and that's definitely the most resilient option, and then that would route the logs to the particular instance that might be available at that time. And so that's where you'd input a host name here. So it's really a matter of going to the device and telling it where to send the data, what port to send it to. You will see specific setup guides for Cisco devices, for Juniper devices. Now for this session, we've been talking about that .41, that HP Pro curve, and I can actually show you real quick what that one would look like. And so we'll log into the interface, we'll input our highly secure password, and give it a second to catch its breath, and I'll show you exactly where on a Pro curve you would go to set these things up. And so that will be in the diagnostics section, is the part of the ProCurve interface that you'll go to take care of that. And so we'll go to diagnostics, and we'll go down to our log configuration section, and we'll let that load. And so basically, just as I said, you're putting in where that data should go, the syslog level, is logging enabled, things like that. And each device will be a little different, but it's really just a matter of configuring it. So it'll send its data upstream to 5544, and then you've got that data inside a log server. So once that's set up, you've got all the data, and that's just like the other solutions. Once you're starting to collect the data, that's kind of when the fun begins. Now, if you're running, say, a free trial of Log Server, you will notice that some built-in dashboards are present. So you've got things like a top sources and types, log server search, failed SSH logins, just some quick options to help you get acquainted with the system. Now, if we go to top sources and types, for example, we're going to see the top host sending in data, how many logs are coming in, the top types, total events over time, and then down below we've got all events. Now, another useful dashboard that's also built right in is the log server search dashboard. Now, with the log server search dashboard, it's really just an open platform. By default, you'll be looking at a day ago to a few seconds ago, but you also have the option to pick any time frame you want, choose a custom time frame, or you can also edit the time frame just by going to your events over time graph and clicking and holding and highlighting a section. And then you'll notice it'll automatically create a filter looking for that particular time period. And then we can remove that just by hitting the X, and now we're back to our default of a day ago to a few seconds ago. Now, to find logs for that ProCurve, a very simple way to do it would be to just punch in the IP address. Now, the thing about this, though, is that if we look down, you can see that we're actually collecting data from one of our Nagios servers and sending that alert data upstream. And so a bunch of these results really aren't from .41. You'll see in the host field here, in the host column, down in our all events table, that that's not actually coming from .41. And so we can fine tune our query a little bit and look for just that particular host, and then see results just related to that host. Now, if we go down to our results, we can see each of the individual log events in the table here, and then you can expand this and see all of the individual fields that have been parsed. Now, one thing I'll mention real quick is that by default, the queries would be Apache Lucene, but it also supports TopN and it supports regex. So if you have a preference and you like a particular syntax better, you can always choose that here. But again, by default, it'll be Lucene. Now, if we go down and look at these particular log entries, we see we've got warning, we see we've got some critical, also some info. Now, as a actual practical use case, you probably aren't too concerned about info level logs from this device. And so if you go down to log severity, where that's actually indicated, you've got a couple options here in the action column. Now, you could add a filter to match this value, that'd be your spyglass choice, or you could hit the cross out to add a filter to not match this value. And so if we hit that, it's actually going to add a new filter, and we can see that right here. So we've got our timestamp filter, we've got the filter that's determining that it's just going to be info, is not going to be represented, so everything but info is going to show up. And if we scroll down, you can actually see we've got all the logs, they're just warning, they're just critical. Now, another cool thing you can do in terms of the graph, and we'll actually zoom in our time frame a little bit here, and we'll drill down just a little further so we can see those individual entries. One thing you can do is add additional queries too to actually color code your events over time graph. So if we open this up, we'll go back down and just double check that it is log_severity. So we'll actually make this one log_severity critical and add that, and you'll notice it actually color codes the graph, which is kind of cool. We could add another one for log severity warning, and we'll have actually 3 color codes, so you can see how many total events there are and also get a good look at what portion of the events that you're looking at are actually related to each of these individual items. And so that's kind of a cool feature. Once you've fine-tuned a dashboard, you've got the option to save it. And so we'll save this as our .41 warn and crit, and we'll save that as a global dashboard so other people can take a look at it as well. And then if we go back to our home menu, you can actually review that anytime. So anyone logging in the system can just jump over, take a look, and be in the same dashboard you've just created. Now, beyond just visualizing the data, and one thing I'll mention real quick is that the dashboards are also very customizable. You can add as many rows as you'd like to. You can add a bunch of different charts and graphs and other items to them. And in the full log server webinar, we do cover that. But since this is just kind of a quick look at each solution, we'll skip that part. But if you do want to learn more about how to make custom dashboards, the full log server webinar will be really useful in that respect. So beyond visualizing the data, you may also want to alert on it. So actually get an alert when certain things do or do not happen. So one option would be to be inside of a particular dashboard you've created with a query in place that's going to narrow it down to what you're actually after. And you could just hit create an alert. And then you give it a name. Now you can name it whatever you want. This is really to help you identify this alert when it pops up. The check interval is basically just like in Nagios XI or Nagios Core. It's how often you're going to be checking for matching results or again, the absence of results. And I'll show you how that works too. So say we set our check interval at every 5 minutes. You've also got the look back period, which is how far back in the logs you'd like to go to see if there are any matching results. And now you could check every 5 minutes, but your look back could actually be every 30 minutes. So every for a 30-minute period. So you could check every 5 minutes, but look over a 30-minute time frame to see if there's results. Now the thresholds typically would be the number which must be exceeded in order for an alert to be generated. So if we set our warning threshold at 2, that means at 3 or more matching results, we're going to get a warning alert. And if we set our critical to 15, that means at 16 or more matching results, we're going to get a critical alert. Now you can also do 1 colon in each field here, and that's actually going to alert you if there are no matching results. So it is also possible to ensure that there are matching results, maybe for example for something like a successful login. For the alert methods, you can email directly from the system. So Log Server can be a standalone log collection, analysis, archiving, and alerting platform all on its own. Otherwise, you can shuffle alerts upstream to a Nagios XI or a Nagios Core server using NRDP, the Nagios Remote Data Processor. You can also send an SNMP trap upstream, maybe to integrate with a SIM system, for example. And you can execute a script to do things like automated remediation, or as another method to send data upstream to other tools. So you pick the method, you create your alert, and then it's going to show up in your list of alerts here. So here's that .41 overview, warning, and critical, and you'll start to see results here. And basically, maybe you'll get an email, maybe you'll see data inside a Nagios Core or XI. So it's really easy to also be alerted when particular things are found within the log data. Another cool thing is that in Nagios XI, which I'll jump back to, there is a built-in wizard for Log Server. And so we'll do a quick filter here for Log Server and go to that wizard. Now the first thing it asks is the host address, and this is the address that you'd like to associate this alert with inside of XI. And so since we've been looking at the pro curve, we'll punch in that IP address, and then the URL is your actual log server URL. And so we'll copy that, so the IP/log server, and we'll drop that in. And then the final question is, what's the API key? If we go back to the log server interface and go up to our username on the upper right and click that, there's your API key. And that's a common question I get. That's the place where the key is in both log server and network analyzer. So we'll copy that, we'll go back to XI, we'll drop it in, and that gives us direct access to all of the queries that are stored over on the log server side. So you can pick a query that you've already set up and define your check here, or you can do your own custom query. So you also have the ability to do a custom Lucene or JSON query on the fly and then generate an alert based on that. So that's a really nice feature and really makes it easy to integrate the two tools together, and then you've got centralized visibility right inside of XI. Now I will actually show you how this would look, and we'll jump back to our service detail here. We'll filter for .41, do a quick search, and we'll zip down. Now at the bottom of this, we actually have a couple of log server alerts integrated right inside of Nagios XI. So you can see here that we can see the status. We can also see the status of our bandwidth and port status checks. So it kind of enables you to see everything all integrated in one place, and gives you that centralized visibility that you definitely want if you're using all the tools. So XI kind of becomes that central place where you can get a nice holistic perspective on everything that all of the tools are checking. Now, you can see this is a really cool, really convenient way to check things. There would be some differences from an architectural perspective in how this is actually working though. So let me jump back to the Nagios XI how it works slide, and I'll pull out the pen again real quick here. And so here's the log server cluster. So this could be multiple instances collecting data. And here's Nagios XI. If you set up the alert in Log Server to send its data to XI, that's exactly what happens. So Log Server is collecting data from all these devices. It crunches the numbers, it runs the queries on that info that it's collected, and then sends that data northbound up to Nagios XI. So it's a send from Log Server to XI. If you configure that check over on XI is actually going to proactively reach out to Log Server, find out what the results of the query are, and then get data back to alert and take action on accordingly. Now, in most cases, it's kind of a situation where whichever one's easier for you is great. But in an instance where you're really trying to get the absolute most out of an XI server, your best bet is to set up the checks in Log Server and then have Log Server crunch the numbers and send the data to XI, just because that'll use less resources than XI checking Log Server. And since XI is that centralized point of visibility, of alerting, of reporting, that might be a good way to do it. In most cases, like I said, it's not a huge consideration, but if you're really trying to push that XI system to the utmost and get the absolute maximum checks out of it, that might be the way to approach it. But both methods are great. As you can see, there's multiple ways that you can approach it. Get back to my regular cursor here. So that's a quick walkthrough on the Log Server side. And now we've talked about all three. Hopefully that gave you a good understanding of at least the main focus and value of each of the tools, and hopefully also information and an understanding of how they can all work together to give you that centralized visibility, to give you that holistic perspective of how the entire network is functioning. And like I said initially at the very beginning, if you're using all three tools, there's not going to be a whole lot happening on your network, either with the traffic itself or with the devices themselves, that you're not aware of and that you can't dig into and investigate and figure out what may be causing performance issues, or ideally to completely avoid those by taking action in advance of them. When things just start to have a little trouble, you can take action, and that way you find out about it before anybody else realizes that performance is degraded, take care of it, and it's like it never happened. And then you're the super administrator whose network is always spinning like a top. So I see we have a few questions. Before we get over to those, I just wanted to talk real quick about the licensing side of things, the free trial, and some of the support options available to you. So we'll jump over to our pricing slide real quick. Nagios XI is licensed based on the number of hosts or nodes. So anything with an IP address or a URL that you're monitoring. For instance, if we jump back to our XI system here and go to our host detail, we see that we're monitoring 47 hosts in this demo system. The cool thing about our licensing is that services don't count towards your total. So even though we're monitoring 413 specific metrics on those 47 hosts, this is just 47 nodes for the purpose of licensing. So it's really fair. It sets us apart from a lot of other solutions. Our pricing tends to be really competitive compared to other tools. We've got a 100 node option, a 200 node option, an unlimited node option. There's also the standard and enterprise. So the prices shown here would be the standard edition. Enterprise would be an extra $1,500, and as you might remember from when we looked over XI, that would get you things like scheduled reports, that really cool capacity planning report, and SLA reports as an example of some of the features Enterprise would unlock for you. Now, Log Server is licensed based strictly on the number of instances in your cluster. We have them all the way up to 20 plus. We don't license based on data, which just like XI, licensing only based on node, sets us apart on Log Server. Basically, as much data as you can collect and manage and make use of with however many instances you've got is great. But from a realistic technical perspective, the more data you're collecting, the more Log Server instances you need. And so keep that in mind as well, that basically Log Server licensing is going to vary depending on how much data you're collecting. If you're collecting 20 gig a day, 1 or 2 instances is perfect. But if you're collecting half a terabyte a day, you're going to need probably 20 instances just to handle the intake, the filtering, and then users doing things like querying and the system sending alerts and things like that. So that's a quick overview on the pricing front. We do also have a free, fully functional 60-day trial available for each of these tools. And so we'll jump over to Nagios.com real quick here. You can try out each one individually. You can try them all out together and try them out, integrate them, find out how they all work. You can find a link to all the downloads right at Nagios.com, right up here in the downloads page. And you'll see XI, Log Server, Fusion, Network Analyzer. Fusion we didn't talk about much, but that's a way to see many XI servers in a single place. So in a bigger environment, that can be really useful. If you click through on these, you'll see there's lots of options too for running the tools. So you can run a Hyper-V VM, you can run a VMware VM. These two would run CentOS 6.9, I believe. So it's going to be running CentOS Linux under the hood. It's a ready-made virtual appliance. You just spin it up, hit the web interface, and go, so it makes it really easy to get started. You can also do a manual install onto your RHEL or CentOS Linux system. So if you've got your own server or VM you want to install on, it would just need to be a fresh vanilla install of RHEL or CentOS with internet access, and then it's pretty quick and easy to get going with that. And then during the trial, there's a lot of support options available to you. So one great one is the forum, and we'll jump over there now too. And so on the support forum, you can register a username on the upper right here, and then post in any of these, any of the general support sections. So you'll see one for XI, one for Log Server, one for Network Analyzer, and basically just register a username, go to the section that is relevant to your question, and then hit New Topic, post details about how you've installed, is it a VM, is it a physical server, the question you've got, whatever issues you might be running into, and then just basically provide as much detail as you can. And then these guys in green, these are the same support techs you'd work with as a licensed client, will help you out with whatever you need. So that's a really good resource. And then there's also the knowledge base. That's also support.nagios.com/KB in this case. And here you can find hundreds of technical articles, tutorials, documentation links to help you make use of all of our solutions. And you'll see there's a bunch of options here. And so Network Analyzer, almost 50 articles, XI, over 500, and Log Server, 72 articles, and then it breaks it up by documentation, installation, troubleshooting, and basically gives you a lot of resources to help you make the most of it. And then another tool would be our YouTube channel. And I'll show you that real quick too. That's youtube.com/Nagios video. And here you can find a bunch of tutorial videos, conference presentations. So this is a really good resource too. For instance, the Nagios XI tutorials, the Get Monitoring series. If you're just starting out with XI, you can find out how it works, what each of the various metrics inside of the wizards, each of the granular decisions you'll be making inside of the wizards mean, and how to manage those, templates, bulk host cloning, how to manage plugins. So this list is growing and growing, and there should be some really good resources for you here on the YouTube channel. And so let's take a quick look. I do see a few questions have come in here, and so we'll get started with those. The first question I see is a question about possible volume discounts. And actually, thank you very much for asking that. And thanks to everybody else that asked questions too, because I forgot to mention that. We do also have volume options. For XI and Log Server, we have volume opportunities starting at a 10% discount if you're looking at 2 or more solutions, all the way up as high as 30%. We also have some site-wide options for XI. So if you could, just email sales quick. We can find out a little bit more about your specific requirement, the scale of it, and which tools you're interested in. And then we definitely have volume options, and we'll make sure you get the best price possible. So yeah, absolutely. We definitely give you a break if you're looking at multiple tools, and be happy to recommend the best licensing for you. I see another question about reports for Log Server inside of XI. And we'll bounce back to XI here real quick. As you saw, for Network Analyzer, you've got the network report, you've got the network query report. Now you don't have an equivalent specifically inside of XI for Log Server, but you do have the ability to forward those alerts, as we looked at towards the very end, from Log Server to XI, or to check Log Server's data with XI. Once you do that, it's just going to show up like any other check. And actually what I'll do here real quick is I'll configure a check and show you exactly how that would show up. So let's go back to the Log Server wizard, and we'll bounce back over to that. We'll add this to that .41, and then I can show you exactly how it would appear inside of XI here real quick. So I'll pull up Log Server. We'll get that URL back in there. There we go. And we'll get our API key back and put that in the system. All right, so once we've got that in, then as we talked about, so we'll just call this one warning in critical from Log Server, NLS. And then over the last, we'll just do 5 minutes. We'll set our warning in critical thresholds like we did in Log Server. We'll hit the checkbox here. And what we're going to do is just hit next. And we're just going to finish this one and just keep the defaults. And so what XI is doing is it's adding this check to the .41, so that's great. Looks like everything applied okay. Now if we go back to our home menu and go to our service detail, and we'll just filter for .5, .41, so we get right down to that one, we'll see that right alongside these is the check that we just set up. So we'll scroll all the way to the bottom, and we've got warning and critical NLS. So this is the check of the data in Log Server inside of XI, right alongside all the other checks. So not only can you visualize it here, and not only would XI at this point become the tool to alert on all that data, but then in the reports here, all of these reports can be done on that particular check. And so all the XI reports apply, the exports, everything, it can just be reported on for things like availability or SLAs or state history, right alongside all of XI's stuff. So as time progresses, I know that in line for future development in Log Server is more reporting capabilities, but at this time XI would be kind of the centralized hub for all of that information. Another question about how much data, another Log Server question, how much data can a single instance handle? Now that's a moving target, going back to Log Server here, depending on a lot of factors. So first off, some types of data are more resource intensive for Log Server to filter. It's called grok filters. That's the log stash side of things, which is the part of Log Server of the elk stack that receives the data and parses it into queryable fields. So if you've got some really complex grok filters for huge chunks of data, that could implement more load onto the system. A generally safe number would be about 20 gig of intake a day, but it could be more, it could be 50 gig a day, it could be less, depending on a lot of factors. Also, the strength of the machine, of course, is going to be a major factor. Each Log Server instance can support up to 64 gig of RAM, so anything past that wouldn't really get utilized. Typically, more cores is better than faster CPUs in Log Server. And then storage space is just a kind of, you just need to do math on how much you're intaking daily and how many days you want to retain that data, because you can fully customize in Log Server how long you want to hold on to those indexes so that they're open and queryable within the system. So yeah, sorry I can't give you a straight answer, but there's a lot of factors that impact it. I will mention though that ideally you would cluster. And we've got a little time left here, so I'll give you a little more info on that. So as we talked about, the sources are going to be sending their data up to Log Server, either a single instance or the cluster. Now, if you've just got a single instance, you basically just have a primary shard, it's called, of all of the indexes. And in Log Server, just real quick to help you understand the terminology, all of the log data that's collected for a day is an index. And each index for the clustering side of things is broken into 5 shards. So each one of those is 1/5 of an index. Now what Log Server does with a single instance is all you have is a primary shard. So if this instance breaks, that's it, game over. The logs don't have anywhere to go, and you're no longer collecting them. You can no longer access that data until you get that instance back online. So if you keep it online, it's great, but if it goes offline, you run into a lot of trouble. Now in a clustered scenario, let's say we were running a 2-instance cluster, what Log Server does is it creates a primary shard on one instance. So that 1/5 of an index will be here as a primary, and then it creates a secondary of that shard on the other instance. And so even if you lose an entire instance, you still have all of your data on this instance. So if you're using a load balancer, the logs still have somewhere to go, and you also still have a system that you can access to do queries and things. And of course, the more instances you add, the greater redundancy you've got and the more data you can intake. So it also not only increases your redundancy, but also enables you to intake and parse more data, and it speeds up queries. So the more instances you have, the faster people are going to be able to query for and locate specific subsets of data. So hopefully that helped in that respect. Feel free to email sales@nagios.com to really, if we can find out how much data you anticipate your environment will generate and find out how long you like to hold on to it, we can at least give you a recommendation. And then the free 60-day trial would give you a great opportunity to test it out. You can cluster as many instances as you'd like to during that trial. So you can put together a 4, a 6, a 20 instance cluster, whatever you want to do, and really test it out and make sure that it's going to do everything you want it to. So taking a look, I don't see any other questions. I really appreciate the questions that you guys asked today. Thanks so much for participating. Thanks a lot for joining me here today. I think we are going to wrap up, but if you need anything else, feel free to email sales@nagios.com. We'd love to hear from you, find out more about your requirements, and outline how we could be of help with those. Otherwise, thanks again for joining me. Hope you guys have a great rest of the week, and thanks again. Bye, everybody.